6 crosses. The graffiti under the bridge, the only color on this sepia-toned day. Snow-covered teeth of Sheep Mountain's wide grin, like a handsaw, lost from the tool shed left out over the winter in the frozen corpse of grass. We've been practicing social distancing for generations. But add a few rocks to flowing water and suddenly there is music. Add a murmuration of blackbirds to an otherwise gray sky, and there's reason to keep breathing. Some small white thing too early for cottonwood seed floats down from somewhere, merges with the water, disappears. No one will believe it was ever here at all, and why should they? 1,000 blades of this frost-edged air send me back to the truck, and the river's music, replaced by the thrum and rumble of cars battering across the 89 bridge. I'm about to start the engine when 6 crosses cut the sky, sandhill cranes, a cosmic yes. Something moves below and above. Feel it? In times like this, we come to rivers.
All right. Thank you for joining us for another episode of Poets in Montana. You've just been listening to Marc Beaudin, who's joining us here today in the studio. Good to have you, Marc.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah,
Marc.
Well, yeah, there we go. Marc. He's a C, I'm a K. We started this thing on a Zoom, and then we got cut off because Zoom decided to cut us off. But I'm glad to have you here. This is better.
Yeah,
anyway.
This is better. I've grown to really detest Zoom. I mean, obviously, it filled a very important void for the last couple of years, but I'm so done with it.
Yeah, exactly. When we were social distancing, as you referred to in your poem. And your poem, of course, is full of birds, which his most recent collection of poetry, Life List, this is Riverfeet Press?
Yeah.
Yeah, Riverfeet Press is full of birds. And I was revisiting that again, and you can't quite get away from birds. Birds are everywhere.
No, which is where the book came because birds kept coming into my poems. Mm-hmm. And I would be, whatever I was writing about or thought I was writing about, because I don't think we usually know what we're writing about until the poem tells us. But working on whatever poem, birds would show up.
Right.
And just kind of, sometimes just a brief visitation, they'd fly through and tell me something.
Did that phenomenon just all of a sudden hit you like a book on birds?
Yeah, I mean, it was kind of, the realization that birds are completely intertwined with my poetry, mm-hmm. And my life, and during very important moments in my life, a bird was always involved in some way. And I started thinking like, well, these creatures have given me so much and so much to my writing, I should try to give something back and honor them with a full book. Yeah. And that's when the idea of making it a field guide to the birds came up. So it's basically a field guide in poetry with each poem a different bird species.
And it also, I guess we should maybe mention too that you had a companion, Storrs Bishop. Yeah. Did all these monotypes in here, this image on the front, and then lots of great images inside.
Yeah, that came together beautifully. I love his work. Storrs Bishop, he's in Livingston also. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. But when I realized, this is a field guide to the birds, and instead of a scientific description, I have a poem. So instead of an anatomical drawing or a photo of a bird to show its ID, I thought, well, I need to do something more poetic with the images as well. Yeah. And these monotypes are perfect because they're like poems. They're like little haiku that you have to move quickly while you're working on it because the ink that you're using only gives you a certain amount of time before it starts gumming up. Okay. And so you roll the ink out on a plate and you start scraping away what you don't want, so it's kind of like sculpture. Oh, wow. So it's like dance and sculpture and poetry, and you're moving quickly. And then you only get one chance. You put a sheet of paper on it, run it through the press, and there's nothing left on the plate. So what you get is what you get. And if you don't like it, you throw the paper away and start over. Start rolling out ink again. So I thought it was just the perfect art form to tie in with the poems.
Yeah. Well, and they're beautiful.
Yeah.
You know, they're good companion pieces to each poem. What else was well, you know, I mean, basically, I didn't do any kind of an introduction, but you, as you say, you are from Livingston, and you're the owner of Elk River Books, as well as the press, right? Co-owner, right?
With Andrea Peacock.
Right. And you also have a website down there called Crow Voice.
Yeah, that comes from one of the poems in the book, actually, about wanting to learn the language of the crows, the bird, the crow.
Right.
When I wrote that when I was still in Michigan, and I moved out here, and everybody thought I meant the Apsalica. But I mean the bird, and just the idea of, you know, if you could really pay attention, you know, enough to what's happening in the natural world to start to understand what the crow are saying, you know, what their language means, you know, that you would really be on a good path. So that's kind of how I ended up with Crow Voices, the website, which is, you know.
Cool. Leave it to a poet, you know, naming shit.
Right.
So what do you want? You want to read us another one? Real quick?
Yeah. Let's see what I've got. I feel
These
like
are all newer poems?
Well, I've got a bunch of new ones, but I feel like I should jump to one from the book since we're talking about it, and then maybe we'll go to some new stuff in a minute. God, do I have any in here? Unless I should just read that crow one.
There you go. Read the crow poem.
Talking about it, dummy. Just read it. This is also probably the oldest poem in the book. It's, you know, getting close to 30 years old, I think. But we're all getting up there in age. So this is called Linguistics. The winter crows are gathering their murder, like holes punched in the sky. They trick the sun as coyote watches, tries to learn the magic, but always is distracted by his own dancing shadow. Their movements are silent negotiations. Their words hold every dream of flight on the tip of my tongue. They sharpen the November dulled edge of the tree line, and I check my cheek for blood. Boots crunch snow, heading toward the river, alone, hungry, and all I want is to understand the language of the crows. Then I will count myself among the few, the happy ghosts who sing themselves to their own untroubled sleep.
All right, nice.
Yeah. I like that poem. That was, you know, it's, I always kind of feel like poems are, you know, just generous little gifts from wherever.
Right.
And it's like I don't feel like I wrote that. I feel like maybe the crows did.
Brought to
I mean,
you
not
by
to get
crows.
all woo-woo, but
yeah.
you know, I think writing poetry is, you know, 90% paying attention.
Did you? So I'm assuming with basically the bulk of that book, and then, you know, other stuff of yours that I've read, that you grew up in upstate Michigan. Is that right?
Well, mid-Michigan.
Mid-Michigan.
Yeah, we don't have an upstate.
We
have up north.
Oh, up north. There we go. Yeah.
Upstate
above the water.
Just, well, that's the UP.
Oh, okay, okay.
Up north is anything, you know, north of where I lived.
Okay.
When, you know, when it starts getting beautiful.
Yeah.
You know.
So you spent a lot of time outside. I'm guessing.
Yeah. I spent a lot of years actually doing outdoor ed, working at summer camps and wildlife refuge. You know, doing mostly with kids, but all ages really.
Right.
So spent a lot of time, you know, wandering trails and lakes and rivers. And
when did you start writing?
very, very young. I wrote really focused as a poet starting in high school. But wrote, I just, as a little kid, I would always write stories and, I'd hammer things out with an old IBM, like one of the first electric typewriters.
Oh, yeah.
That weighed, as much as a Volkswagen. And if you got your hand too close, it would, just take your finger right off. But yeah, I would hammer out little stories on that, really bad ones, And then I wrote, when I moved into poetry, I wrote really bad poetry for the next,
of course,
10 years. And but eventually, if you keep at it, you start not hating them.
Well, what else do you want to share?
How about a new one?
Yeah, sounds good.
Just kind of skipping around here. Let's do this one. This one is another one that came out of experiences in Michigan, and it's a true story. Well, it's a true place, an imagined story about a true place, and I'm definitely indebted to Richard Hugo for that. And the title. I'm like reading his poetry. I thought like, oh, I need to write a poem about the Magic Kitchen, because this is the kind of place that Hugo would have written about had he been in Michigan. And it's called The Magic Kitchen and Laundry. The best sweet potato pie in town comes from this east side laundromat where bone-tired mothers are overrun by children still speaking all the languages of joy, and the Cherry Street prostitutes take a much-needed break from one of the few jobs America has offered. There, at that window where you might expect to pick up your dry cleaning, but no one in this neighborhood has owned anything worth such expense in years, not since the auto plant shuttered and the money scattered like cockroaches to township subdivisions with fear-white fences and chemlawn dreams. And maybe that's you, there, on a stepladder in your freshly black-topped driveway, washing your new boat, gleaming 300-horse Evinrude, and the name Weekend Warrior painted in gold glitter. Or maybe you are this woman here, in plastic pumps and hidden scars, gathering aromas from passing takeout, resting your eyes and feet before being kicked back to the street. When you were a child, you didn't dream of turning tricks to feed your kids. You dreamt of being an architect or a zookeeper or a ballerina, like the one you once saw at a matinee of the Nutcracker, how she spun into a blur, shedding all her angles, and then leapt free of all those hands trying to hold her.
Yeah, nice. That does have echoes of Dick in
there.
Yeah.
And they really did have the best sweet potato pie in town, and great fried okra too. That was an earlier draft. I included the fried okra, but it was just slowing things down, so I had to go. I just performed this piece back in Michigan a couple of weeks ago, or a week ago, or whenever that was. I was back there and did a show with this group called the Northwoods Improvisers, an amazing group of jazz musicians, and we opened with this piece. And
all right.
I wish you could have heard what they did with it, because
And they did. And your last effort was this recording, right? From Coltrane to Coltrane, a CD that you put together with a whole bunch of musicians from that side of the state, Billings area. And
no, these musicians are more Boston-based.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I didn't realize that. So it was recorded back there.
It was interesting because it was a show. So it started with Billy Conway and Laurie Sargent, who are both stunningly wonderful musicians. And I had done a show, the jazz poetry thing in Livingston at the Attic, with Dave Casario and a group of musicians, Billy Conway on drums, Buff Brown, and Parker Brown. And, you know, we talked about, we got to do that again, we got to do it again. And then, of course, COVID hits.
Right.
Billy also was diagnosed with cancer, and it got, you know, put on the back burner, put on the back burner, put on the back burner. And then finally, Billy's cancer was not getting better. And he and Lori were moving back east to be closer to family. And I thought the project was never going to happen. I had a group of poems I was, you know, calling From Coltrane to Coltrane an Eco Jazz Suite. And I thought of it as, you know, we would do a live show, do all these poems with improvised music to it, and, you know, record it. When they told me they were moving back to, you know, New Hampshire, I realized, okay, well, it's just not going to happen. But they stopped by the bookstore on their way out of town and said, record the poems and send it to us. We'll get Dana over and, you know, to our place, and we'll record everything and mix it and send it back to you.
Oh, interesting.
And when they said, you know, we'll get Dana, I suddenly realized, like, oh, it's, you know, kind of reuniting the band Morphine. But instead of the brilliant Marc Sandman on vocals and bass, it was somehow going to be me on, you know, my poetry, which I like still do not, you know, I can't fathom. Dana Colley, and he was the original saxophone player for Morphine, and then Billy was the drummer, and Lori also, you know, she's worked in a lot of groups like Orchestra Morphine that came out of after Marc Sandman's passing.
Right.
So it was just this incredible opportunity to work with these people. And I recorded the poems, I mailed them out to them. They created all this amazing music, mixed it all, sent it back. I gave it to a friend of mine, Ian Thomas, who's a great musician also, to master it. And he said, yeah, this is very cool, but we got to redo your vocals because they're just not that good. You know, the quality was crap, because I did them myself, and I don't know what I'm doing.
Right.
So I went into his studio and re-recorded all the vocals on good equipment with somebody at the controls who knew what he was doing. And then, you know,
and he put them back in?
Mixed and got it all finally and mastered. And I'm really proud of how it turned out. It's nice.
Yeah. I was listening to it earlier before I came down, and I mean, the modern technology and the miracle of science.
Yeah.
I mean, it sounds perfect. It sounds like it's live. It sounds great.
Right. Yeah. It would have been preferable to be in the same room with them, because you know, when I work with musicians, what works best for me is to just respond to what they're doing.
Sure.
So whatever music they're playing, I kind of cater my delivery to fit.
Right.
But with me doing the delivery cold, you know, just alone, I felt like it was, you know, well, it's definitely not what it would have been had the music been there simultaneously with it.
Right.
But, you know, other than that, I mean, it's not that I don't love it. I could love it more, you know. Unfortunately, Billy passed away in last December.
Yeah, that's a shame.
Ended up being the last time he and Dana played together.
Oh, wow.
You know, probably like a 40-year brotherhood and friendship and partnership of creating music. So that kind of
and he does, you know, he does a good representation of Coltrane in there for you.
Yeah. I'm just
Yeah, it's a good
couldn't be
one.
happier. Maybe I'll do a poem from that.
Why don't you?
And it's actually it ends. It's the last track on the CD called "Learning to Listen," and it's dedicated to Farouk Zibeh, who was just a masterful, legendary Detroit jazz artist, saxophones mostly, and a composer. Just a really brilliant human being that I was lucky enough to see live numerous times and get to know a little bit. And it was his band that I performed with in Michigan a couple weeks ago, the Northwoods Improvisers.
All right.
He had recorded and performed a lot with them. And so it's, you know, the piece is dedicated to him and in his memory and about him. But also, so last night I went to the event that Chris Dombrowski,
right,
a poet here in town, and Jeffrey Foucault, a fantastic musician. They were both really good friends with Billy Conway as well, and recorded with him, and Jeffrey and he toured for I think like 10 years, and so they put on a show last night, kind of a tribute memorial, rumination on dealing with grief and loss, and it was stunningly beautiful. They were, they're both just wonderful people, and so maybe even though this poem is for Farouk, today I can dedicate it also to my friend Billy Conway, if I can find it. I know it's before that. What's it called? I might have to do it out of the CD, out of the liner notes. I know it's here. Oh, it's right. It's on
right
the
up
page.
front.
It's the page I was on. So this is called Learning to Listen, and it starts with a quotation from the Mathnawi by Rumi, but as kind of interpreted by Farouk Zibeh from one of his pieces where he would do some spoken word as well in some of his stuff. And so it starts with that, Learning to Listen for Farouk and Billy. Listen to the reed and how it tells a tale complaining of separation. With dusk descending a Marcus Garvey Park suffused with the tones and stones of Harlem, surrounded suddenly from within by your music. Having heard the news just before boarding a plane, having heard the news that your sax was in its case, the case closed and latched, having heard the news. Shoulders of buildings rise to meet the song. I hear it in the yowls and laughter of playground children. I hear it in the poetry of evening birds unseen in every tree. We are a million fragmented souls separated from source, but the reed calls out for reunion. The truth that I squeeze in my hand and thrust into a pocket is that I'll never again hear you play. The vibration emanating directly from your breath, through your horn and the prismatic air, to my ear, a nest of tongues that imitate each wave. And the question, have I yet learned to really listen? Or have I been letting sounds merely bounce off my surfaces like an ice-bound lake? Like a window shuttered against the light, like a drumhead without its resonating tree body that's needed to take the sound deep, to tell the story to itself again and again and again until, shattering the container of self, echoes it into the world. Listen.
Nice. And so the musician that you wrote it for initially was a reed man, a sax player.
Yeah.
Right? And Billy was a drummer, right?
Yeah.
So that works
and
out pretty
well.
well.
And it kind of works out that I start with the sax and the reed, and I end with a drum. Yeah.
You got them both in there.
Yeah. And I think it's again that idea of paying attention, the idea of really listening and deeply being present, not just to, events in your life or birds in your life, but people, the people who really matter, that we need to honor them with our attention, and our focus and our dedication. And
music helps that way too, I think.
Yeah.
I mean, you have to pay attention to appreciate like a jazz concert as opposed to just putting a nickel in the jukebox.
Exactly. Yeah, the jazz, and most of the music I listen to is not background music.
Right.
You don't have it on while you're having a conversation. You put it on, you turn off. Preferably, you turn off all the lights and you turn it up really loud and you lie on the floor or, you know, sink into a couch and you just let it wash over you and devastate you. And, you know, that's, you know, like that's the only way you can listen to Coltrane.
Yeah.
Especially the later material.
Yeah.
And it's when you know, and it's the same as listening to, you know, Beethoven. You've got to you've got to open yourself up, become vulnerable, and just let it obliterate you, you know?
Right. Yeah, well, I mean, you know, I guess it's probably a good way to go through life on any level. Yeah. Whether you're going to the movies or whatever you're doing, you know, fishing. I mean, paying attention is just a really good thing to do, you know. Driving down the road.
You know, although that's, you know, probably when I pay the least attention to what I'm doing, but, you know.
Well, I had a job for, you know, a long time in which I was a professional driver, and it was like, you know, a couple of times you get caught when you're not quite paying attention, or you get lazy, and it's like, oh shit, wake up call, cold sweat. Now you better get back to business, you know, and pay attention. So yeah, it's just paying attention.
When you realize a few miles have gone by and you didn't see.
That's really scary there.
Yeah. Well, and then of course, you know, trying to write poetry while driving with your journal on the steering wheel, and, you know, or birding. I do a lot of birding while driving. You know, birding at 80 miles an hour, where you're like looking out the window, like, oh, what kind of hawk is that? And, you know, meanwhile, you're swerving all over the road.
Right.
Yeah. I don't recommend that.
No.
Yeah.
So, what do you think about Vagabond Song? We haven't talked about that.
Oh,
which was your is this your first publication?
No.
Vagabond Song.
It's
came out in 2015.
That sounds right. Yeah. I mean, before that, there were a number of chapbooks and a you know, nearly a full-length collection of poetry. And, yeah. But this is the first thing Elk River Books published. Because I wanted to start with one of my own, so I could make all the mistakes on mine instead of messing up on some other writer's work. But then since then we've published Greg Keeler and the anthology Unearthing Paradise. That's, there was an effort to stop some gold mines from going in just north of Yellowstone in Paradise Valley.
All right. Is that your latest publication?
No, that was after this one. Keeler is the most recent. And we do, I mean, you know, there is such a thing as Elk River Books Press, but, you know, since 2015 we've done 3 books, and that's about as many as I'd like to do. That's about the rate.
Right.
You know?
Right.
So
the Keeler book is an incredible book too, I think. You should be congratulated on that.
Oh, thank you. Yeah.
You know, anybody that could, you know, get him in print for 200 and some sonnets, I think is hats off.
And it was, you know, I think the book, we ended up with 180 sonnets, but that was cutting down from the 250 that he handed me.
Right.
And he had hundreds more. He's like, well, these are the, you know, the.
Well, he was doing one a day.
The funny ones I'll send somewhere else, but we'll give you the. Yeah, he writes, and he still does it, as far as I know. Yeah. Every morning he starts by writing a sonnet. Yeah. He's been doing that for, you know, years, maybe.
That's what the real poets do. I do the crossword puzzle every morning.
Well, it's, you know, you're still working with language. Yeah. Well, you know, I think it's that idea of, because people will ask me all the time, it's like, do you write every day?
Right.
And I don't write every day, but every day I'm a writer.
Oh, yeah.
You know, like the physical act of, you know, doing this is just one part of the job. You know, it's like Billy Collins talks about how important it is to just look out a window for several hours a day.
Right.
You know, if as a poet.
I spoke with Rick Newby, the poet from Helena, and he was talking about how, you know, I mean, his publication record is like one every 10 years or something like that, and he spends like years researching and going through stuff and you know, prepping himself before he really knuckles down and gets to work on a manuscript. So that's it's not exactly the way, not my process, but it's,
right. Yeah. I I don't know, I might be every 5 years. Although, so Lifeless came out in 2020. The CD came out this year.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe I'm getting quicker.
Well, quicker is not necessarily better,
No.
I don't think.
No.
Do you want to read something from Vagabond Song? It's an interesting book. And tell us a little bit about it. It's a little different.
Yeah, so I spent, I haven't looked at this in quite a while. I'm going to have to figure out what I want to read. Right after college, instead of going to grad school, I started hitchhiking and spent, the next nearly 2 decades, road trips, hitchhiking, wandering, living in odd spaces temporarily, and then going back on the road. And so this book is kind of the story of all of that, a memoir that might be a travel memoir, but I call it Neo-Haibun because it blends poetry in with the prose passages, but the poetry is not specifically haiku, so I'm not calling it haibun, which would be prose and haiku mixed together.
Right.
But it's just kind of those days, and I've realized eventually that this was basically my MFA program, was to hitchhike around the country and around other countries for a couple 15, 20 years, and in which case then this becomes my dissertation.
There you go.
So maybe I'll just read from the beginning of it.
Anything.
I should have brought my copy, because in my copy I've got a lot of things crossed out and mark where to jump from here to there, and so this will be a little rough because you didn't mark this up for me. If I don't get back on the road, I'm going to lose my dog-damn mind, howling mad and barking crazy like some burning saint. Give us this night our vagrant moon. Give us this day a double yellow line, flashing like a beacon of endless possibility. Kinetophilia, go. Sitting at a gimp-legged table, kinetophobic fingers hovering over silent keys. My reflection in the frosted window refuses to make eye contact. I had thought this would work. I thought it was just what I needed, to hole up in a borrowed cabin, build a fire against the coming winter, and write. The romance of it, the poetry. The writer in a Northwoods cabin, cupboards stocked with pasta and wine. He writes all day, late into the night, a single Coltrane tape to fill the air. He plays the clacking keys of his Remington in syncopated unity with that prophetic wall-crashing horn. The pages fill with the black dance of words. On weekends, his lover arrives with more wine and all the delicious aromas of lust and life and laughter. They read the pages. They read the topography of each other's bodies. They read the poetry of hair and skin, flesh and sweat. She goes back to the city and he goes back to the typewriter. Everything flows smooth and luminous. That was the plan. Mice and men, boys, mice and men. After nearly 3 months, I have maybe a half dozen pages. Her visits grow less frequent, less poetic. The cabin has become a prison, my typewriter a cellmate. Moonstar, my Remington streamliner, is a worthy companion. But after all this time alone together, we have very little to say to one another. A blank page has been staring back at me for days now. All my Noten reads been rent and wore, and my poor muse has split for downtown, waiting in line with the other plasma prostitutes. Short walks in the pine-crazed air aren't enough. I need miles to burn and voices not my own in my head. I need change that comes faster than the change of light slanting across the ghosts of blueberry bushes and withered stalks of mullein as the autumn drifts into winter. So I go back on the road.
Yeah, right. Then you start hitchhiking.
Yeah. That's funny. As I was reading it, I was like, oh yeah, that's the part I usually cut out. I think there's going to be, I have a handful of the hardcovers left. We did a limited edition hardcover. I have a handful of those left. The paperbacks, there's 1 copy left for sale.
Oh, all right.
At Elk River Books.
You want to do a second
I
printing?
don't know if other stores have any copies left. I imagine anyone who bought copies still has them on their shelf.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm thinking about doing a second printing. When I toured for this book, I called it the 100 Highways Tour, and traveled 100 different highways to do readings and signings for the book. So I want to, and I kept a blog, I guess, journal entries that then I posted to the website. So I might kind of condense all of those into an extra chapter of the 100 Highways Tour.
Yeah, yeah. Well, you got around with it then, so it's spread out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was fun. I had readings everywhere from, coast to coast.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's really, when it comes to like a book of poetry, something along this line, or even self-published type things, that you've got to do that. Yeah. Yeah.
And I love doing readings. I love, just being the out-of-town poet and meeting new people and,
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's...
getting up on stage.
Well, I mean, that's definitely... Not every poet does, I know that, and not every poet is too excited about the oral art form, but I think most of us probably are. I mean, that's kind of how you fall in love with it, right? That's how you come to it, is by hearing it.
Yes.
Usually, before you ever see it on the page.
Mm-hmm. Well, all the poems, the first poems that we were all exposed to as toddlers, are absolutely meant to be read out loud,
Oh, yeah.
That's why they rhyme, that's why they have fun-sounding words in them, that's why they have a musical rhythm to it.
Exactly.
And that's our origin as for our art form, is around a campfire performing this stuff out loud.
And I have talked to a couple of people recently, older poets, or people who are a little bit older than me, so I think they're older poets. We've talked about the fact that a lot of younger editors, publishers, and younger people today have been writing out of maybe more of a language poetry tradition, possibly, or at least a major shift in gears from the Hugo time, which was definitely, the stepchild of Redkey, and a musical. I mean, back when people were still writing in regular meter and rhyme, and so we all grew up with that kind of thing. That's how you came to poetry. Besides, Jack and Jill went up the hill to get, and sometimes when you see journals today, they'll say, "Oh, well, that's a real old style you have," because it wants to, bang music or sounds off of other words, and alliteration and all that kind of thing that I thought poetry was. But maybe not so much as it used to be, possibly.
I don't know why this, as I was driving across the country last week, this is something I wrote in my journal against the steering wheel while going down a blue highway at 80 miles an hour. But it popped in my head, so you got to write it down. That's my job. I can't not do that. But I wrote, poetry is language, striving to become music, failing, and never admitting defeat. And I think, for me at least, that's what poetry really is this always striving to become music, but failing. And the failing, I think, is really important, because if it doesn't stop short of becoming purely music, it can't still be poetry. It still has to have, the meanings of the words. But the meanings of the words are, I think, driven by the music of the language, not the other way around.
Right. When I was talking to Rick the other day, we were mentioning how, some of the poems that, and he had said that he thought that they were kind of his take on kind of the language poets when he went after this, but it was basically just kind of playing with language.
Yeah.
And in that whole process of just playing around with language and not trying to hold on to a narrative necessarily, it was this musical thing. It was like you're listening to music, because I think that takes over. That part of our brain naturally takes over if you let go of trying to tell a story, you know.
Yeah.
You just wind up making a bunch of silly music, you know.
Right. You know, but I think, you know, the right word is the one that has the right music, you know.
Yeah.
If you know, your brain is telling you that, you know, it was, like I think Hugo talks about in Triggering Town, you know, if the barn was actually red, but you need it to, the music of the poem needs it to be blue,
right?
You change it into a blue, and it wasn't those colors, and it wasn't a barn, but whatever he said. You know, that's the idea that you know, you don't owe, you're not a journalist, and you don't owe the truth of that literal event or memory anything.
Right.
You owe all of your allegiance to the truth of the poem and the truth of the music of the poem, and that's what you have to be true to in order to, you know, hopefully write a successful poem.
Right.
Yeah.
However you want to entertain yourself, and hopefully others.
Yes. Yeah.
Well, read us another poem.
Okay, I can do that. What else did I pull here? How about 25 Bears? This is from Life List. And this is a good example of how many of the poems, the bird, you know, makes a brief visitation to kind of set things in motion.
Yeah.
You know, but as you know, you can tell by the title, 25 Bears, it doesn't have a lot to do with birds. But this takes place up in the Yak Valley. The promise of flycatchers hidden in the deep wood, tease of song from the shadows, the diamond light of water breaking into river's breath against the faces of rock, the caress of cedared wind and undulations of fir trees, standing room only on a west-facing slope, the scant clouds pawing their way across the sky-blue sky that is nothing but sky blue. The taste of this coffee on the cabin's deck high above the voicings of the Yak River and all the rest of it, made richer by the fact of those remaining 25 grizzlies, somewhere out there, living their perfect ursine lives. Without them, colors fade to sepia, sounds to a distant tin, and we lose some part of ourselves, impossible to describe to future generations, who will grow old believing that the natural shape of their soul is to have a cold, dark nothing lodged at its center, a hole the size of a bear track in the spring mud.
25 Bears. Yeah, nice.
Yeah, the sad thing is, if I were to update this poem, the number would need to be lower now because some of those bears were killed for,
these are bears in the Yak?
Yeah. Yeah, when I was up there, it was estimated that there were 25 grizzlies remaining. And then if 2 or 3 have been killed since then, you know. But we're working on, you know, there's a couple of organizations that I support. Save the Yellowstone Grizzly is a very important organization that Doug Peacock founded. And then the Yak Valley Forest Council that Rick Bass is, I don't know if he's president or board something or other, or, you know. But, you know, working on grizzly bear preservation and trying to get these various groups linked up, you know, so the Yellowstone bears can get to, you know, the Crazy Mountains and can get to eventually to Glacier and, you know, the Yak Valley and start, you know, if they can't connect, these little island populations are doomed, you know. There's only so long you can survive with a small gene pool, you know.
Yeah, I was kind of wondered why. I know the Selway Bitterroot, you know, it's and the Frank Church down there, and then all that land in the southern Bitterroots that basically makes its way all the way over to Yellowstone.
Yeah.
There's no real reason why that shouldn't be repopulated again, but for some reason it really hasn't bounced back from 1900 or whenever it was, they were pretty much harvested.
Big part of it is the highways.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
we've looked at, tracking, and you see all of these grizzlies, their tracking signal going right up to I-90 or I-15 or whatever, and turning back, going right up and turning back, right up, or getting hit and killed.
Right.
And so, it's one of our programs right now with Save Yellowstone Grizzlies, trying to put together all the moving pieces to do a wildlife underpass. That we need them. These
they work.
These highways are they're impenetrable walls.
Oh, I remember somebody telling me something about just in the city of Missoula, there's like 500-700 deer killed in the city limits every year or something like that.
Yeah.
I thought, no, that can't be right. But somebody said, yeah, it was phenomenal, the number of deer that were just roadkill.
Yeah.
And a few years ago, I know because it's country that I like to hang out in, the Upper Fish Creek area, that probably 10 years ago or so, they shot a grizzly. Somebody shot a grizzly up there accidentally. They were hunting bear, and when they came upon the bear, it was like, uh-oh. And that's what they figured was going on. And I've heard said, I suppose it's rumor because I can't verify it, but that people who, either through the Forest Service or Fish Wildlife, there are animals in that country, a few that maybe not are permanent residents, but they're moving through all the time, and but trying to get further south is
and that's what it's really about human tolerance. To these explorer bears are probably the most important individuals, because they're the ones who are going to expand the ranges and connect the different populations. But every time there's an explorer bear, which means it's traveling through a place where people aren't used to seeing a bear, we label it as a nuisance bear and either kill it or move it.
Right.
And that's a huge thing that needs to stop. It's with now we're getting like way off the topic of poetry, but with with the loss of the whitebark pine due to climate change, the Yellowstone grizzlies have to find new food sources, and to do that they have to move to lower elevations, and that will bring them in contact with people and roads and ranches and livestock, and we've got to learn how we can give them some space.
Yeah. We have climate change is going to give us lots of things to learn, I think, over the next 50 years.
I could do a climate change poem.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
Go for it. Climate change
to bring
poem.
it back to poetry somehow before I, rant on and on.
Probably one or two, this one and another one, and we're probably getting close to our time. But,
sure. Yeah, so this is called Glacier Park Toponymy. Ghost moon haunts a midday sky as we hike through firework explosions of bear grass in riotous bloom. I stagger along on four legs, skeletal skewers of hiking poles clacking amid the rocks, like some half-formed insect with more eyes than I ever wanted. Our climb began near dawn. After 2 days gathering huckleberries and paddling past a family of mergansers, looking like they just got out of bed without combing their hair, as we allowed clock time to fade away. One should always climb a mountain at its pace rather than that of the city. After climbing 5,000 feet, we will stand breathless, wide-eyed on the expanse of Sperry Glacier, or rather what's left of it, as the glaciers of Glacier are receding like the light in the eyes of every mountain goat we pass. The century-old chalet where we slept will be consumed by wildfire just weeks later. The glaciers will be completely gone in 15 years, and we'll have to rename this place We Could Have Acted National Park.
There you go.
Yeah, we could have acted. That's going to be on our, humanities tombstone, I think.
Shoulda, coulda, woulda.
Yeah. Do you want one more short one?
Yeah, well, yeah, whatever. Yeah, anything you want to read?
Or, I could read one that's 40 pages long.
Well, about 40 probably.
Well, this one is, I like how this one feels like one to go out on. It sends us off back on the road.
All right, there you go.
Which is a good place to be. This takes place in Baja, Mexico. It's called Mizan-San. The sky slashed with scimitars of frigate birds, the sea falling in and out of love with the moon, a yellow tablecloth, a red can of tecate, a courtyard of caged parakeets, and the giggling water of a tiled pila. When I swam alongside the whale shark, the world's biggest fish, I thought it would feel more momentous. I thought something would pass between us. The frigate birds glide along invisible determinations. Tomorrow we'll drive into the heart of the desert.
Nice. Yeah. Baja.
Yeah, that's a place, man.
Water and desert. Well, this has been a delight, Marc. I'm glad we did this instead of trying to, do it over the Zoom.
Yeah.
Even though that's a great way to do something if you can't do it in person.
For sure. Yeah.
Good to have you. Next time you're in Livingston, Montana, stop in at Elk River Books and Marc will sell you something.
Yeah, come find our new location. We're over on 2nd Street now. You haven't seen the new place
haven't.
yet.
I've seen it online, but I haven't been in the actual spot. I need to get out of town.
Yeah.
The pandemic has kind of just made me sort of sit around the house a lot.
Sure.
Time to move.
Yeah, we'll come to town. We'll have a drink and talk some poetry.
Sounds good. So we'll see you next week, Poets in Montana. Thanks for joining.